Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Leuven Institute for Advanced Studies, I really would like to welcome you very warmly, though it's a very dreadful evening with Belgium being kicked out of the World Championships. So it's really too bad. But anyway, I'm glad that you want to spend some time with us and listen to those four ladies, of which I'm going to present only one, and then the moderator is going to take over. So let me introduce Kathleen Gabriels. Kathleen Gabriels is a master in philology from this university, and then moved to Ghent to study philosophy, and then moved to Brussels, where she got a PhD in philosophy. Then was a professor in Brussels, and then moved to the University of Eindhoven, the Technical University of Eindhoven, where she was assistant professor. And recently she moved to the University of Maastricht in Limburg, in Holland. And I pronounced Maastricht like I said, like in my dialect they say Maastricht, so it's really like that. It's taking over. She's there already a few years now. She's a program leader of a new course called Digital Humanities. And she's the publisher, in fact, she's the author of two books in Dutch. One of the first books on AI in Dutch, one called Online, and the other one, On Life, sorry, I always make that same mistake. And the other one, Regels for Robots, which both have now been translated also in English. So Kathleen, I'll give the word, and then you take over from here.
Thank you, Maurits. So I've heard that I can just sit down all evening. That's not because of laziness, but this is how we have been ordered. Can you hear me? Also for the people through the live stream. Okay, so welcome everyone. Tonight we will have a panel discussion on basically the research and the past professional lives of our people in the panel. And I will first introduce all three of them. Then each of them will give a talk of approximately 15 minutes, and I've been asked to time, that's why my smartphone is with me. So the first person sitting on my right is Joanna Bryson, and she's a professor of ethics and technology at the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. And she researches the impact of technology on human cooperation and AI and ICT governance. She holds degrees in psychology and AI from the University of Chicago, the University of Edinburgh, and a PhD from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And before moving to Germany, she worked at the University of Bath, or Bath. We've been discussing about the pronunciations. And she has also been affiliated to several universities, for instance, Harvard University, University of Oxford, University of Mannheim, and also the Princeton Center for Information Technology Policy. And during her PhD, and she might talk about it, she observed the confusion generated by people who are anthropomorphizing AI, leading to her first AI ethics publication already back in 1998. And she also advises companies and policymakers with AI policies. I also forgot to mention that after we have the talks, we will have a panel discussion, and we also welcome questions from you. So you can already start thinking of potential questions. And then we have Virginia Dignum, and she's a professor of responsible AI at Umeå University in Sweden, and also an associate professor at the Faculty of Technology, Policy and Management at the University of and she researches the complex interconnections and interdependencies between people, organizations, and technologies. And her work ranges from engineering of practical applications and simulations to the development of formal theories. And her current research, and that focuses more on the topic of today, also focuses on ethics of AI systems and value-sensitive software development. and her PhD focused on a model for organizational interaction. And also interesting to mention that she also worked for the industry before her PhD, so that might also be interesting maybe to talk about. And she's involved in many things, for instance, a fellow of the European Artificial Intelligence Association, the Global AI Council of the World Economic Forum, and also the Executive Committee of the IEEE Initiative on Ethically Aligned Design. And I've also heard that she has been moving around a lot in Europe, from Portugal to the Netherlands to Sweden, so that probably also influenced her career. And last but not least, we have Sophie Zhang, and she studied physics but worked as a data scientist at Facebook, and she became publicly known as a whistleblower. She used to work for Facebook, now Meta, and became very critical of the company. And during her time at Facebook, she discovered how some national governments also used Facebook to manipulate their own citizens. And she has publicly testified about these discoveries and revelations, and she might also talk about it tonight. And apart from all this, she also likes taking care of her cat. Cats, sorry, plural. So first I will ask Joanna to talk about 15 minutes, and then I will most probably already ask a question, and then we proceed with Virginia.
All right, well, thanks. Is the levels are okay on my microphone? Okay, great. So thanks for coming here. I don't know exactly what you expected for us to be talking about. I think I'm really honored to be on this panel. These are all experts in how artificial intelligence is really used and the impact it's having on society. And so I thought I would do a little bit of a discussion of how I got to be considered to be one of those people. I also worked for 5 years, 5 years initially paying off my undergraduate debts as a programmer, and a couple more years after that I worked for Lego. I worked on the Mindstorms project. So I'd worked on virtual reality for Lego as well as robotics. But anyway, my first degree was actually on natural intelligence. I was really interested in, ever since I was a child, like why animals thought differently than people thought. Why are we the only ones with language? What's going on with all that? And so I learned a lot as an undergraduate. And then I did work as a professional programmer, and I then went and did a conversion master's at Edinburgh. I actually was in business long enough, I wasn't sure that I would really like academia anymore, but I thought if I went abroad, I would certainly learn something from that experience. I loved academia, and I loved Edinburgh. They actually had a dedicated artificial intelligence department, so that had been founded before the computer science department. So it was definitely about not just programming, but also logic and language, linguistics and music and philosophy. So it was something that was really an exciting time and place to be. And from the work I did there, my first thing I built was my first big AI thing I built, not out of industry, was a accompanist that used this particular theory of intelligence that some people in AI had innovated, about it being that you didn't understand the world entirely, but you only were able to perceive as much as you needed to perform the kinds of actions you needed to do. So I made something that if you played like some melody, a folk melody, it would pick out the chords, and it only knew enough information, didn't know any music theory, it just sort of followed the structure of the song. So anyway, that was good enough to get me into MIT, unbelievably. I got into MIT, and I was working on a project, which is like now, it's just like so embarrassing, but we literally were trying to build a 2-year-old child. We thought that would be easier than an adult, right? So it was a robot, and most of the people involved in the project were building the robot. So it turns out that MIT is really very close to the hardware. It's really like signal processing. And I was a programmer. I was like a proper programmer with a psych degree. I didn't really know how to build robots from scratch. And so, but anyway, while I was trying to program this robot, which did not work at all, it turned out in the long run, when we got another engineer in, that it hadn't been properly grounded, or as they say in British, earthed. And that was why it didn't work. I was at MIT and they didn't know how to ground something. But anyway, I didn't know that either. It didn't work at all, and people would come up to me and say, oh, it'd be unethical to unplug that. And I was like, it isn't plugged in. The autists, I'm confused now. They're like, well, if you did plug it in, I'm like, it doesn't work. And they're like, well, if it worked. I was like, what are you even talking about, right? All the things I've ever programmed, this was not the most complicated thing I programmed at this stage, at least. And there were other working robots that were around, and nobody said that about them. It was just because it was shaped like a person, that people thought they knew. And I said, why do you think that you owe obligation to it? Like, well, we've learned from the feminist movement, we've learned from civil rights that, the least likely things turn out to be human. That's like, well, if what you learned from feminism and civil rights was that, a pile of motors that doesn't work and isn't turned on is as much like you as I am, and there's a problem here, right? So anyway, I published a paper because I also had a very naive Midwestern, small-town, Victorian notion of what science was. I thought, I'm a PhD student at MIT, and I thought something was weird, so it must be weird. And so I just wrote a paper about this, which took 2 years to come out, and it was called Just an Artifact. And it was just trying to convince people that there's nothing special about AI, so why do people get so excited about it and so emotionally involved with it? And so that was my first AI publication. Then I got hired. I got hired as an assistant professor, and in Britain that means you can do whatever you want. Basically, there's not a lot of constraints. And so I worked on what I really cared about. I did learn about how animals work. And I started to understand that in biology, if you're trying to understand animals and you're thinking about nature, there's no point in figuring something out for yourself because you're going to die, right? And so mostly when we evolved, if we come up with a solution in our genes, then our children can inherit those. But if we just figure something out for ourselves, well, okay, with humans, we might tell our children, we might write it down, but before humans, what was going on? It turns out that it only makes sense one of the things that makes sense about having a lot of intelligence on one single animal is if that intelligence can be shared. Okay, so if it becomes a public good, and then it can be transmitted onto so this is called epigenetics. It's transmitted to the next generation, not through the genes, but through other things in the environment. So I started working on understanding public goods investments. So that's why I started working on cooperative behavior, and not necessarily humans. I was looking at a lot of non-human primates at that time. But anyway, lo and behold, George Bush got elected, and he had, another guy, actually, another professor, Ron Arkin, managed to get $40 million to work on, I think it was $40 million, to work on ethical AI war robots. They're like, no more Miley massacres. It's going to be robots. They won't be emotional. I thought, oh my, this is going to be another Miley. It's going to be another Abu Ghraib. I know that people think that robots are responsible for themselves. They think that they're people. They aren't. And so people are going to say, oh, bad robot, because the robot blew up a village, and then they'll blow up the robot. And then the generals who made the decision, or the president who made the decision, is getting off the hook. So I started writing more papers about AI ethics, and so people started inviting me to the table. And so I was involved in actually the first soft law that was written at the national level, which was the British Principles of Robotics. I used to have a webpage, it was the AI ethics webpage, and it would come up like first for if you searched AI ethics. And I thought, oh, nobody cares about AI ethics, I care about robot ethics, and it came up on the third page of Google for that, so that was no good. But anyway, now it's no longer first because lots of other people have gotten into that space. But anyway, the point was that, how am I doing for time? Very good. Oh, I'm doing fine, okay. So the point was, at some point I realized I needed to I started getting invited more and more to various things, many things with Virginia, like the IEEE put together a big thing trying to figure out ethics. And in fact, the same guy, Ron Arkin, shamed me for not being in this AI ethics procedure through IEEE, and I was on sabbatical, so I joined. But I just kept getting invited to governments, and they brought me in because of those old papers I mentioned about the over-identification. But in fact, how the questions they wanted to have was like, how is AI going to change our society? And it was actually the theoretical biology I've been studying to understand evolution of cognition that was more useful. So basically, if you have an increased rate of communication, then you tend to start working more like a group. You have a more capacity to operate as sort of a herd animal. And so I was making predictions along those lines, and they found that really useful. But I thought, I really better figure out if I got the right answer, because they keep inviting me back. It wasn't bad for a spontaneous, unexpected thing. So that was when I took that public goods work and started working on the problem of political polarization. Now, it wasn't quite, that may not seem like a logical leap, but what happened was actually I was asked on national television, again in Britain, at 7 o'clock on the news, whether AI was causing inequality. Now, they had told me we were going to talk about robot weapons, and then we talked about that instead. So I knew nothing about it, and so I went to a talk the next day, next time I had a shot, I saw posters, says, oh, talk about inequality, I'll go to that. And it happened to be about the fact that inequality is incredibly well correlated with political polarization, right? So it turns out that's one of the best, in fact, I think it's the best predictor by county of when you have polarization. Like if you look at Brexit, if you look at Trump, if you look at the Swiss referendum against freedom of movement, if you look at those two sectors that the Russians were able to pervert in Ukraine in 2014, all of these things were the places that had the most economic inequality. It was not the most social media used. There has been polarization since well before there was mass media of any kind. So, anyway, when I saw the data on political polarization, I thought, that looks like one of my models that I've built trying to understand the evolution of cooperation that I thought had a bug in it. Because there was like different agents in this model that had, and these models are very simple, so they're following very simple little rules, and yet they're coming to different conclusions about what is the optimal amount to invest in the public good. So why was this? So I had to go back and look at the model more carefully, and it turned out that it actually makes sense. Because in the real world, which mathematicians sometimes forget about, you tend to be born right where your mother is, and then it takes you time to move. So quite often, as long as you inherit your dispositions about how cooperative you are, you'll have cooperative communities and you'll have uncooperative communities, and they'll be apart from each other. So the cooperators that are close to the uncooperative communities, their ideal investment in the public good actually is lower, because it's going to be free riding by the uncooperative people, right? And the people that are only around other cooperators, their ideal investment is higher. It's still not infinite, you can't just give all your stuff to people and starve yourself, right? There's some correct level of investment, but it's going to be higher if you're around other people that also cooperate. Okay, so we actually had a paper that came out in December 2020 about this, about political polarization. And so that's, I think, the most important work that I'm doing. At the same time, I have been involved in the EU in particular. In fact, I've fought hard. I got a British passport so I could be an EU citizen. and then I got a job in Berlin that literally started on Brexit Day, 1st February 2020, my new job in Berlin. But anyway, I've been working a lot. Again, I never know who's going to ask me to do what, but I contribute whenever I'm asked. And I have had some impact on that, or at least I'm happy with the way the AI Act has gone. And a lot of that has been not only talking about this theoretical biology, but just reminding people, back to that robot thing, that AI systems are engineered. And so it's not that we need to understand every detail of how like a deep learning, what every little weight in a deep learning neural network does. If you go in and you audit a bank, you don't say, what does every neuron in the brain of every one of your employees do? That's not the question you ask. You say, did the employees follow the correct procedures? if someone stole the money, can you tell who it was? Because if the bank can't tell, the bank has done something wrong. There's processes that have been established about how to do that. Well, software is becoming more like that. And in fact, we've had procedures in software to know who wrote what code for decades. But in AI, people tend to be a little sloppy about it. So the new legislation is basically saying, look, software is a product. It was a debate for a while. But it is a product, and we are going to be able to hold people to account for what they do. So those are sort of the two threads of what I'm doing at Heritage School. I'm still advising people whenever they ask about the fact that you can legislate software. There is something you build, you engineer. And then I myself tend to engineer it, building models to get better intuitions about what people really do. And at the Heritage School, we have a great data science lab. So now we're actually testing those models that I built against actual data, from real people, and seeing whether or not they're good predictions, and they are. The people who are most polarized tend to be the people who actually have the most to fear. If they're near bankruptcy, if they're near foreclosure, if they're near losing custody of their children, if they have those kinds of economic threats, then they don't trust as much. And I guess it shouldn't be a surprise when you come down to it. But that's what we're working on right now.
Thank you so much. And as I said, I'm going to ask one question and then I will give the floor to Virginia. But it's already a very difficult question, but we might return to it during the panel because I'm very interested in your research on Cog. That was the name of the robot. And my question is, what have you learned about the relation between human and robot intelligence?
One of the reasons we built robots was because to make it in a way easier, because they had the same problems we had. So when you're just building AI in the abstract, then it's nothing like human intelligence and your intuition doesn't work. But if you give a robot a problem like moving around this room and not tripping over things, then at least you start reasoning about the same kinds of things that animals have to deal with, like how do you tell if there's an object or if it's just another part of the floor. Right, and please feel free to sit down. So, any relationship between robot intelligence and human intelligence is mostly a design convenience. It's easier for us to reason about it that way if we sort of build it the same way. But it's not. That doesn't make it a moral necessity that's the same. Like, for example, anything that you have in a digital artifact, you can back up. Okay. Again, it depends how you build it. I'm not saying every piece of software is backed up. You probably have games. You probably don't all back up your phones. You should, right? But you could, in principle. And so we don't have to worry about saving a robot or saving the last copy of Shakespeare, which also is backed up, incidentally, or saving a child. Right? We don't have to make that decision. You only save the child because the humans are not reproducible in the same way. And even if the robot was for some reason in your mind your best friend, if it's backed up, then it could just walk up to you again and say, "Hey, how do you like my new body?" Right? Here's the Apple bill. And so I think the main relationship is one of confusion of humans looking at things, wanting themselves to be immortal, and actually I didn't mention this in that little thing I went. When I was working on the evolution of language, I started to notice, I learned about large corpus linguistics, so I am literally one of the people that had the paper in 2017 in Science that showed that you get implicit biases, just like what we have in our society. You can get that out of any machine learning that you trained off of the language our society produces, right? So we're transmitting our biases to our children just by, not only by our language, by, watching old 70s TV shows and seeing women in the kitchen all the time, right? But that was one of the pieces I did. So I think a lot of it is about expectations, but people get very confused about this. And I'm probably taking too long, but I will say one other thing. To the extent that people think that AI is a human, then mistreating AI for those same reasons might make them feel that it's okay to mistreat a human. So if you get really good at slamming the phone down on robots, and then you're not sure if it's a person or a robot, it's a little easier to slam the phone anyway, right? Than it would have been back when you were slamming the phone on people, which I do sometimes do anyway for salesmen. But anyway, So one thing I've very much learned is that, so people think, oh, therefore we have to treat robots like they're people. No, therefore we need to build robots that are clearly not people. And we need to, expose to people and transparently the fact that the robot doesn't have the same kinds of needs that a child or whatever, or an adult would have.
Thank you. And now Virginia will give a presentation on her multifaceted career
Wow.
in industry and academia. 15 minutes.
I was 14.
I much longer career.
I thought it was the same age.
More or less, but anyway. Don't take away my opportunity to get a few more minutes. Anyway,
Okay.
I'm losing my minutes out of this. Okay, so the multifaceted career and how it started and how it brought me here and where I hope to go before retirement, which is probably the next step, most clear step in my career. So I'm originally from Portugal. I studied applied mathematics at the University of Lisbon, mostly because there were no computer science studies in Portugal at that moment. 82 I started, and this study in Lisbon, they did have something which they called computation logic, and it was actually two Portuguese PhD students who had recently finished a PhD in Edinburgh in AI, which were then employed there, and the whole course of this mathematics course, the computational part that it had was heavily influenced by AI. So it was not called AI, but it's also one of these cases in which the study of computation at the University of Lisbon started from basically an AI studies. So what I did basically was much more close to what would be nowadays considered an AI degree than any computer science degree. By the end of my studies there, two things happened. One is that I started building professionally AI systems in '86. So for the ones who think that AI started 10 years ago with neural networks, it has been quite a long time ago. So that was one. And the second one is that I met a guy in a conference, which then became my husband. He happened to be Dutch. He was studying in Amsterdam, so I continued to study in Amsterdam, doing my master's in Amsterdam. At that time, my plan was, if I ever had a plan, and probably that's the most thing which is the kind of the continuous thing in my career, is that I never really planned for whatever I did. It mostly happened. But so, going back to that time, my main idea would be that was that I would be doing I was not planning on an academic career, but much more on an industry career, and that's what I did until 2005. So from this career in industry, which mostly was connected to AI, so I was building professionally AI systems during the old so-called AI winter, the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s until 2005, when I definitely left to academia. I was building AI systems. Many of them failed. Other ones, they didn't fail, but I think actually I learned much more from the failures from the systems that failed than from the ones that didn't fail. So the first one that I built in '86 was for the Portuguese government, and it was actually very similar to the one, the child benefit scandal of the Netherlands. There was not a scandal, it also was not but I was in my own, 22 years old, I think, building a system for the Portuguese government which would determine assignment of social housing to people that would need. So I thought it was normal, why not? Let's go and do it. So it's kind of, and I built it, and what I realized from that one is that reality is not mathematics, and things happen in the reality that cannot really happen in mathematics. Things are inconsistent, things don't really are incomplete, you don't have all the information that you need. The information that you need That then I remember at a certain moment the system decided to assign a house to a family, only for them to realize that house was actually already occupied by someone else, but that information was nowhere. So the poor guys. Yeah. So the system, it's the best match is that, and that information. So it's really made me realize real life is much more complex than whatever they teach you in school, and all this mathematics which assumes that life is clear and can be programmed and determined, it doesn't really work very well. So then like I say, I moved to the Netherlands. I did a master's at the Free University, and at the same time I did continue working in industry, and after my master's I mostly worked in industry. The most successful of all the work I did is one which is, I never worked with robotics, so this idea of the
Anthropomorphizing.
that's
I had to practice it too. It's not easy for English speakers either.
It never really was one of the concerns guiding my research or my work. But what was really a concern was this idea of decision making and the impact of decision making. And that has been in all the different aspects. So the most successful of my early career or work in industry so far was for an automotive company in which I was building, let's say, proof that orders for cars would get into the factory coming from all over the world. Build a red car with green chairs and 5 wheels or whatever, and send it to somewhere else. So those orders were 5 wheels. Probably was possible to appear. So again, the description of what would arrive at the factory for the building, the things that they were ordering, again, they were incomplete, they were inconsistent, they were impossible, they were whatever. What would happen is that if that thing would get into the plant to be built, the thing would stop, then it would be very costly to stop the whole production line, and they had to take that car with 5 wheels or where they are trying to put the 5th wheel, take out of it. So we did build a system which ran every night, and they would check whether those things were complete, not only whether they were complete and consistent, but also it would kind of repair, and that was the part of artificial intelligence, would repair the description of the car into something that would make sense. Then it would be someone who would have to ask that. There I realized for the first time the importance of regulation, and one thing which I often say, that regulation is definitely not against innovation, came from that time. While I was working there, this is in Born, in the south of the Netherlands, very close from here, the obligation for European cars to have a catalyst, so a kind of a filter for the exhaust pipe, came. And that was taken in the automotive industry as kind of the end of the world, or the beginning of the war. It was really the worst thing that could ever happen. The cars would never be good anymore, nothing would work anymore, it would be really a misery, and they were all completely kind of stupid law, and this can never really be good for our industry and for our process and nothing else. If anything, completely the contrary, because they had this obligation, the regulation, you cannot build a car without a catalyst, then they start thinking, okay, if we want to have the cars with the processes and the efficiency that they have, and they have this cork there in the back, we have to design our cars differently. And cars are nowadays much more efficient, the motors are all kinds of things were beneficial, and it has been reported by many in the automotive industry exactly because of regulation. So every time that people in AI come and tell me, yeah, the moment that the AI Act of any other regulation appear, it will be the end of innovation and whatever, I really get very, very irritated. I know that you also get, because it's exactly, okay, if you get this regulation, you might not like it or like it, but it will force you to think in a certain direction, and that can only be good for innovation. Other ones, so the failures. Where are we going? How many failures can I talk? Okay, so I will tell one of the failures, an interesting one. A supermarket in the Netherlands, which I will not name, because you probably know it, and it's probably together with some Belgian supermarkets. Also, some time ago, ancient history, they introduced these client cards. And right away they realized that with these cards, by the people using these cards, it will be very easy to offer the people a system to tell them what is your shopping list. The card knows exactly what you buy every week, and it can generate the shopping list. This is 25 years ago, so nowadays they do this, but 25 years ago, and they asked us, can you build such a system? No, it's not computationally or artificial intelligence, it's not a very difficult one, so we built it all, and it was all, everything was working fine, and at least we thought. And then the supermarket thought, nah, we actually don't want to use this system at all. It's not at all good for our business model. Yeah, but you guys want it. We build what you guys want, and now you don't want to use it. No, because if the people, what we did, extra from what I had said, is that when people would arrive there to the supermarket and get their shopping list from a box where they put the card, they also would get the map to get to their shopping list. Completely wrong, because they want people to get lost in supermarkets. So they don't really, they change the setup of the supermarket regularly, exactly to make sure that you keep lost there. Because if you are lost, you will find things that you never in your life thought you want to buy, which have a very good thing in top, this is in sale, which is really not, it's just kind of the price. They change the price without really making it, often they make it even more expensive, so be careful of those sales. And then they make you go around and you will end up buying much more than what. So a big failure, this AI system which would give you your shopping list and the map how to get it was very, very bad. Anyway, so what I got from all this, first is that technology, and especially technology that influence decision making at all types of levels, really has an impact not only on the people that get the shopping list, or the house which someone is living there for some kind of mistake, but also changes the way organizations work. And by changing the way organizations work, changes the work environment for people, change society and so on. So I start more and more getting interested in understanding. I was not talking about ethics at all at the time I did my PhD, but more about the societal impact and societal influence, which would be kind of a second or third level influence based on all these type of systems that we were building, mostly in a very naive, and how could we be less naive in the way that we build this system? So I would call it nowadays to be more multidisciplinary, don't leave simpleton 22-year-old engineers to build things which might change the face of the earth. So make sure that these teams or these people developing it have a different understanding and also much more starting from the potential impact of the systems. So that's when I decided to do a PhD. I was working for an insurance company in the Netherlands at the time, and they were very happy that I would do it. They financed my PhD at the time. So I did it as an external, as a PhD, industrial PhD at that time. But then at the end, when all the time I had been publishing and doing research, and I met Joanna already before I was in academia. But I got more and more interested also in this freedom to do research and not just following up the next flop that they would ask me to build for yet another strange application of AI. So then I stayed in academia. In the meantime, I had been in Africa for some time, so I lived 2 years in Africa. I didn't make robots 2-year-old, but I did 2 of the biological ones. Starting at 2-year-old, I don't think is the good time to start. Start them earlier, it's easier. Anyway, so I had all kinds. Life happens, like you say. And so I moved to academia. In academia, I did more and more focus exactly on the societal impact, and slowly starting also realizing it's not only societal, it's all ethical and implications of what we are doing. Then we start getting meeting quite often, Joanna and me, in all kinds of places where these issues were happening. Like Joanna already said, the IEEE, other types of organizations and places where advice was being asked on these issues, but also on which we were also bottom up with other researchers, setting up what we thought as researchers to be some kind of guidelines for our own work. 2 minutes, okay, that's quickly now. I also started being asked to give advice at the European Commission at other place, so I was part of the high-level expert group at the European Union, which came up with the trustworthy AI guidelines, which are kind of the first step for the AI Act, where Joanna is now mostly involved. I have been working with UNICEF, designing guidelines for the use of AI and how that impacts children in particular, working with UNESCO and so on. And a couple of years ago, it doesn't really change much the context of my research, but it gave me a much more, bigger opportunity than what I could have had in the Netherlands while I was doing research there. I moved to Sweden, where I'm now leading not only a research group at the University of Umeå, with 15 researchers, but also a national program on AI, humanities and social sciences, which I think is really the important thing. It's a national program in Sweden with 80 million euros, 58 research groups, 76 PhD students and so on. And that really gives the opportunity to really establish the ideas and the directions in a much bigger opportunity. And that's why I also, the last minute, and I'm already over time.
No, it's okay.
The last thing is that what I see nowadays, my role, and especially from now on, I think, getting to retirement in too quick the time, is much more that my role should be on creating the space where other ones can continue and develop this type of research, so this type of problems. And it's a lot of work and a lot of management, which is what's not always the most interesting, but I do feel that gives the opportunity to create a space for a large group of researchers, multidisciplinary, to really address and possibly understand and develop the processes and the means for others not to make all the mistakes that I could have continued forever. Anyway, that's it. And we are. I did got more minutes than you anyway.
So thank you very much. And you mentioned the Dutch childcare benefit scandal, in Dutch the toeslagenaffaire. I'm not sure how well known this is in Belgium. So maybe could you say a bit more about it, and also the role of algorithms, and maybe what you would advise policymakers, knowing that this has happened, and also the work you were involved in Portugal.
So the Dutch government has the privilege of being the first government in the world who has been put out of government by affair with AI, an AI algorithm. So the government was fall out a couple of years ago because of big problems with AI algorithm. That algorithm had been developed a couple of years before by the Dutch tax office, Treasury, following orders by the government to minimize, or to not minimize, but really make disappear all fraud around child benefits. They were convinced that a lot of people were frauding. They were especially concerned with the immigrant population, that they were frauding even more because they didn't have so many kids as they thought. As they claimed, they were living somewhere already in Morocco or in Turkey for a long time, and they still were asking those benefits. So the government had all this part of their idea that immigrants were doing all kinds of wrong things in the country. One of them was this child benefit fraud that they were very concerned with. They asked the tax office to fix it, to build some system which would identify fraud. The system indeed identified fraud, but the best way to make sure that you will identify all fraud is to identify everything that is dubious as being fraud. So then at least you are sure that only the purely correct cases are not caught as fraud. that was the big problem. So they were catching all kinds of people and families that were not frauding at all, but they had forgotten to fill something, or they had given wrong information, or indeed because of their background, societal or ethnic background, didn't understand the question correctly. Those questions are not easy. So they caught all kinds of people which they were signaled by the algorithm that they were frauding, and they asked them to give the money back, and of course that explored people to lose their house, their children, their marriages, their lives, all kinds of awful things. So the point is not so much, and we discussed this afternoon as well, not so much a problem of the algorithm. The algorithm actually was doing what it was designed to, like all the mistakes that I did in my life. Usually they try to do what you are asked to. You don't really get the right question. What you are asked to build is often not what people really want you to build. So there is a much need now for a multidisciplinary understanding and participation in these development teams. Don't let a 22-year-old engineer start building stuff by herself, but create a group of people with different backgrounds who understand society, understand people, understand taxes, understand whatever else. Make them together understand what is the question the government is asking us. So really one way to go forward is a better design process and requirement elicitation process for these systems. And the other one is a liability process, so that it's not just because the algorithm says so that the government or the tax office right away has to take that as God-given truth. But and also there should be an opportunity, a much easier opportunity for the families to contest the result. Just say, sorry, I didn't know, or why you think that I'm frauding? I'm not trying to fraud at all. So that type of process also needs to be part of the development of the system. So it's not just making the technology work, but make the technology work that you really want, to be the purpose that you really want, and not the purpose that you are given. And don't stop the development at the moment that the algorithms finish. Yeah. But also take care of the maintenance and the liability and the recourse process.
Thank you so much also for clarifying it. And then I'll give the floor to Sophie, who will also talk about her experiences at Facebook.
Okay, thank you very much. And just to check, everyone hear me okay? Sound going fine? Okay, great. So hi everyone, I'm Sophie. So I think I'm a very unusual person on this panel and probably in this room, in the sense that unlike everyone else, I am not an academic. I have not been in academia for 7 years, unless you count this week. When I was growing up, when I was 6 years old, I had the plan already. I would become a physics professor. And as you can see, that has not quite worked out today. I mean, though not for lack of trying. I mean, I went to undergraduate in physics at the University of Michigan. I was quite lucky in finding a professor I worked well with. I published my first paper when I was 18. As first author, I think it has something like 60, 80 citations, which is not typical if you're not familiar. I wrote another single author paper when I was in undergraduate, and so anyways, I did well enough in undergraduate that I won scholarships, and I was accepted into Princeton for graduate school, and I was like, yes, I'm going my life goal, except it did not quite work out. I ended up running away from Princeton with a master's. I think they're very embarrassed about me. I'm the dirty secret, because when you go into a PhD program for physics, especially at a distinguished university like Princeton, I mean, it looks bad when people drop out. You have everything paid. You have everything paid. You have stipends. You might do teaching or research or have scholarships to achieve it. I had a scholarship, anyways, it is very atypical for people to run away from the program with your degree half incomplete, which is exactly what I did. So originally I was doing cosmology research in physics. I moved to biophysics when I was in Princeton before realizing that I was not actually interested in biophysics, and then I ended up running away 3 years into my PhD program, and at that point, I was very lost and confused and like, what am I doing with my life? I need to find a job. I need to find a job really quickly because I don't want to be unemployed. I've spent my whole life in academia. This is strange. So it was frankly pretty difficult to make the transition, partly because it was unplanned. I mean, I sent my resume to a lot of different places. I got interviews at 2 places from personal connections, which went nowhere. I also sent my resume to maybe 3 dozen, 4 dozen places, completely by random. One of which turned out to be needing a data scientist and hired me. This was very coincidental, but I also sent it to many people. So you could say, I don't know, what's the analogy? Data dredging? Like it's a low chance, but you do it to so many people that the chance succeeds. And you know, the point is, it's hard to get your foot into the door if you're an academic who spent your entire life in academia and you want to go into a completely different field that has no obvious correlation to your previous field except being quantitative and using numbers. And so my first job was, I was a data scientist at a tiny queer women dating app in the Bay Area in San Francisco. And being a data scientist was not actually that different, in the sense that when I was an academic, in physics there are 3 different types of work you can broadly do. Firstly, you can do theoretical work, which is you sit at a desk and write equations all day. Secondly, you can do experimental work, which is mostly building things these days, whether it's at CERN in Geneva, or in which you might be making things for the Large Hadron Collider, or you might looking at so that people can look at the number results. You might be looking at things, building telescopes in the Atacama Desert in the South Pole to be launched into space. And the third thing is in between. You look at the numbers that are produced by experiments, and then you see how they match with theories. And that is what I was doing in my work in physics. So that is not actually very different from what a data scientist does in industry, which is broadly, you write code, you look at numbers, you figure out what they mean. I mean, obviously there's differences. I mean, in academia, you can afford to be patient. I mean, it's all right if you don't. I mean, okay, if you're looking for tenure or something, there's publish or perish. But for the most time, like, if you didn't get anything that great this week, that's okay. Have a nice shower. Have a nice shower. Think about it. Right. Think of it. Maybe you got an idea there. And in industry, it's very different. It's much faster paced. It's and part of it also was that I was a tiny startup. I reported directly to the CEO. I didn't do anything unless she told me to, which somehow was not the relationship the dean of my physics department wanted with me. Not sure why. That was a joke. And so, anyways, that was my first job. I ended up at Facebook as my second job. How I got it was pretty silly in retrospect. So I was referred to Facebook by an acquaintance I had known from a group of ex-astrophysicists in data science in tech companies in the Bay Area, which is specific enough that it tells you all you need to know about the academic diaspora. And so at many companies you get referring bonuses. If you tell the company this person is good, and they eventually hire this person, you will get money. So I am pretty sure I did not know him well enough to ask, but I am pretty sure he sent the name of everyone he knew so that he would hopefully get money from them. And eventually he got money from me. But maybe Facebook is like, well, this program did not work out. I don't know. So anyways, and so because I was referred by him, Facebook was sending me emails trying to say, are you interested in us? Do you want to do interviews with us? And at first I was happy at my old job. Eventually, I mean, things happen in the industry. I think I was maybe too good at my job and automated myself out of fun. First I was downsized to half-time, then I was downsized to working part-time contracting, and I was like, okay, I cannot live in the Bay Area in San Francisco, because if you know anything about San Francisco, it is that rent is ridiculous there. And so, anyways, I decided, okay, I'm going to start actually doing interviews. And it was much easier the second time because I had the foot in my door. And one of the places I talked to was Facebook. And so I told them I'd be happy to talk to them. The recruiter set up a time with me for her to call. And I got to that time, and I sat by my phone, got ready, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited. And a few days later, she called me back. I'm really sorry, she told me. I'm so embarrassed. This has never happened before. I know you probably don't want to work with me anymore. I'm going to send you to my colleague. I promise she won't do the same thing. Except she did. And so at this point, I had basically given up on Facebook, quite frankly. Until a few months later, they sent me a message. It was probably algorithm generated, which is quite appropriate. The message was something like this. We see that we have tried multiple times to recruit you with interview processes, and it just has not worked out. Is there anything we can possibly do to convince you to give us another chance? I told them that they could get better recruiters, which, okay, a bit more politely than that. But and the third time was the charm, quite literally. I mean, the interviews went fine. They gave me a job offer, but maybe you're looking back in retrospect, you're like, that dang algorithm, it did exactly what we wanted it to, and that did not work out for us. So, when I joined Facebook, I was very upfront after they gave me the offer. I told them I wasn't convinced Facebook was making the world a better place. I was concerned about what it was doing. That's precisely why I wanted to join it. Because if the company is perfect, there's nothing to improve. If everything is solved in a field, why would you go into that field? Everyone was already doing great work. I wanted to join it precisely because I wanted to help fix it. And they told me, you'd be surprised by how many people at this company say that. And which maybe they're looking back now and thinking, that was our first red flag. I don't know. But anyways, it was very different working at Facebook, which is a giant multinational corporation, from my first company. It was my second job out of graduate school, and currently my most recent job. But so when you join Facebook, you don't immediately go into teams. You go through a training process in which you're hired in which then you go, and there are specific teams looking for openings, and you won't necessarily get your first choice, but you will get a choice. It's like in grad school when you're looking for research advisors. I hope that your analogy makes sense. Like, maybe you really like this professor, but he already has so many students, and you find, okay, this isn't my first choice, but it's good enough. Okay, thank you. And so, anyways, since I should hurry up. So you may or may not have read about me in the news, and why what I did is important. Anyways, when I was at Facebook, I ended up working in my spare time on things like fake accounts run by nation-state governments, such as Azerbaijan, such as Honduras, in order to influence their own citizenry and manipulate their own people. And oftentimes, Facebook was reluctant to act. In some cases, it refused to act. I tried my best to get it taken down. While I was at Facebook, I was essentially working two jobs in my spare time, two jobs at the same time, but in my spare time, because I had an actual job to do at the same time, which is maybe not that different from what academics do. But I mean, when I was a grad student, I was working 80-hour weeks sometimes, which was not. But anyways, I'm doing a lot of talking, and you're probably thinking, everyone else on this panel is talking about AI and algorithms and ethics. What does she have to do with algorithms and AI and etc.? And the answer is very simple. None of my work related to algorithm and AI. I actually told Yano that when he tried to recruit me for this project. He's like, we're doing an AI ethics reporting project. I told him none of my work related to that. And he eventually convinced me it was okay, it was close enough. It definitely touched on ethics. I had direct industry experience with algorithms, even if it wasn't the main focus of my work. Because currently, when you have networks of fake accounts or etc. run by governments, you need actual people, because AI that currently does not have the capacity to pretend intelligently to meld in with local political context, local knowledge, and robustly pretend to be a real person. And so when you read newspaper articles about, say, Russia potentially interfering in British or US elections, there is no AI or algorithms involved in that currently. Those are actual Russians sitting at their desk, probably in Moscow or somewhere, who are tasked with doing things all day. Because it takes a lot of sophistication, and it takes a lot of sophistication and effort. The people tasked by the government of Azerbaijan is a small country in east of Armenia, north of Iran, south of Russia. People debate whether it's Eastern Europe or the Middle East. It's in the Council of Europe, I think, but not in the European Union. Anyways, they have maybe 10,000 people tasked with running interference on social media. They produce something like 3 million comments each month, each individually written, so that every time their political opponents write something, anyone who wants to talk about the political opposition wants to write something, they will get deluged by comments about why the government is great and the opposition is terrible. Azerbaijan, you see, is so democratic that in 2013, they accidentally released election results a day before the actual election. The physics department must be on the cutting edge of temporal mechanics research. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make, this is an area that does not currently involve AI, but it is not hard to see how developments in AI can have significant impacts in it in the future. Like with GPT, for instance, which is a text generation algorithm. Currently, it takes a lot of effort in terms of paying people to sit at a desk and do things. Like, people do not work for free, especially if you're in a relatively wealthy country like Russia. I mean, not super wealthy, but like you have to pay people significant amounts, and that takes government resources. There is a large barrier to entry for this, and people still do it. What will it look like when it becomes very easy to automate this? You do not need to pay robots 15 euros an hour. You do not need to get a desk for robots. You do not need to have a nice, well-maintained building and amenities. And so there are real questions raised by how will people adjust to this in the future? What are the risks posed? Anyways, I think...
15 minutes exact.
Okay, well, here we go.
So my question, so you talked about a number of governments, for instance in Azerbaijan, but when and why did you decide to blow the whistle in terms of Facebook itself? Can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give you a better sense of the picture, everything you've read about me in the press and heard about me just now, like for instance about my work at Facebook, including catching rogue governments red-handed, that was not my actual job. It was work that I was doing in my spare time that was close enough to my actual job that I got away with it. I'm going to use an analogy to try and describe and explain. Suppose tomorrow, in Paris, the police hire a new policewoman, and they tell this policewoman, your job is to work on robbery and theft and stealing things, and they mean shoplifting, purse snatching, things that make tourists stop coming to Paris. And this policewoman does this. But also, in her spare time, she works with, I think it's the DGSI, to root out Russian hackers that are hacking into Parisian hospitals in order to demand a ransom and steal their money. This is technically stealing in Paris. It is technically what she was ordered to do, but it is way above her pay grade, and it is not what she is expected to do. And you might think, well, obviously she would be celebrated for this, she would be honored, but not actually, because in that scenario, her own police chief would be like, the French government, the DGSI, they have their own people. They're so much better paid. Her job is to help us. And the French government people, they're like, she's just a cop from Paris. She doesn't know anything. Why do we need her help? She's embarrassing us. Anyways, I'm sorry. Now let's segue. I forgot the actual question.
Why you decided?
Yes, why did I decide to go the way so? So initially, thank you. So initially, I was doing this work in my spare time, and frankly, in terms of concrete results, I achieved more at Facebook than I did outside of Facebook by becoming a whistleblower. So, I mean, I think fundamentally that it is important to work within the system to try and fix things, so that if nothing else, you have a record that you tried and the system did not work. That you tried using the systems and processes in place. And that is essentially what happened at Facebook. I tried for as long as I could to work within the system, to do my job and also do this work in my spare time to protect democracy and governance worldwide. But this did not last forever. As you might expect, it is not actually very sustainable or effective to work two jobs simultaneously. I mean, it started wearing on me. Eventually, my manager decided that the work I was doing in my spare time was not valuable. I was ordered directly to stop. This was at the start of 2020 during performance review season, and at that point, the U.S. elections were that fall, and I knew that even though I was ordered to stop, it was quite likely that things would come up that people would ask my help for anyways, and that even though I was ordered by my manager, I had previously been asked for assistance by, say, Facebook vice president, who could overrule my manager. And so I decided it was my responsibility to stay out through the elections in the United States as an American citizen, and Facebook disagreed with that. Eventually, they fired me for underperformance in August of 2020, and I offered to stay on and paid as a volunteer through the elections. They were not willing to take that offer, and so anyways, as to why I went public. I think fundamentally it's important to distinguish the use of fake accounts from other areas on social media, such as misinformation, hate speech, etc. Because fundamentally, things like misinformation, hate speech, these are areas that there is some visibility into. You can give an ordinary person a piece of content and say, is this misinformation? Is this hate speech? And that person will come to a reasonable conclusion. They may disagree, but they will be able to have reasonable, logical debate. The purpose of a fake account is to not be seen. And the better you are at not being seen, the fewer people will see you. Imagine if the average Belgian citizen decided, I want to go out and they don't want to look to see if there are any Russian GRU spies in Belgium. They will not find any, and this is not to say that GRU spies in Belgium do not exist. It is to say that the average Belgian will go out and suspect people for no reason. They will think, this person is very sleepy. Are they staying up late writing letters to the GRU master? Actually, they were working on term papers. This person is dressed up as a stereotypical spy. Oh wait, it's American holiday of Halloween. If they find any actual spies, it's because the spy is completely incompetent, because the goal of a spy is to not be an obvious spy, unless your name is James Bond. I don't know how he gets away with it. And so because of that dynamic, I mean, backing up a step, the purpose, I mean, Facebook is a company. Its goal is to make money. To the extent it cares about its impact on broader society, it's because people at Facebook are human and need to sleep at night, and because things can get in the news and affects Facebook's ability to make money. Like we don't expect Philip Morris, the tobacco company, to reimburse the Belgian government every time a Belgian citizen gets lung cancer. I mean, that idea is almost absurd, but I mean, and so in those cases the governments regulate, but people cannot regulate what they do not know is going on. for fake accounts, for the use of fake accounts to conduct manipulation. What consistently happens is that when attention is brought on the issue, it is usually by things that are garbage and not actually bad, or by things that are the people from the dropout incompetent school of spying, essentially, because you only find things that are if you try not to be seen, you're only found when you're very bad at it. And so, Facebook allocates attention based on how much attention people pay to it, and this works for other areas, but it does not work for fake accounts. In Britain, for instance, there was a case. I was called upon like a dozen times to investigate it. What happened was they were very terrified about Russian interference. And this was in the lead up to the British elections in 2019. They were concerned that this was Brexit bots. There were no bots, there were no Russians here. What happened was a group of British conservatives believed it would be really funny to troll their political opponents by pretending to be badly disguised bots. They began posting all the same thing over and over again, like support Boris 100%, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of Britain at the time. Then they began posting snippets of broken pseudocode as if to appear to be computer script algorithms that had been broken. and it would have been funny if it weren't sad because the Facebook comms department, they kept being asked about this. It's like, this is terrible, and you need to urgently investigate. And I'm like, I've investigated this 4 times already. I have an actual job. There are no bots here, and you should put out a statement. You're like, we can't put out. Anyways, at the same time, an actual British politician was getting fake photos from Bangladesh, but no one paid attention, and so that got no attention from Facebook. They ignored it until after the election. And I think there's a story here about essentially what I mean, that attention goes to what gets public attention, and what gets public attention when it comes to fake accounts is what is the most incompetent, useless, and often not even actually bad. Like, you can't solve a problem unless you know what it exists in the first place. Imagine if cigarettes gave people cancer, but only the tobacco companies could know that, and only the tobacco companies had any chance of finding out. In that case, I think it would be very important for someone from within the company to come forward and tell the world, and that's what I've done right now.
Thank you so much for your extensive answer. But I first have a question for Joanna and Virginia, and it also links to what Sophia's been saying about regulation, and you can only regulate if you know what is going on. I think Virginia and Joanna as well mentioned the EU AI Act, and I'm not really sure if everyone is familiar with it, so maybe if you could say a bit more about it and what we can expect here.
Okay. So, well, there's a lot of, the EU is leading the world in terms of regulating digital artifacts. I mean, first there was the GDPR, and you may only know that because of people actually violating the GDPR by putting up really annoying banners that it's hard to click the reject all from. That's all against the law. And in fact, Facebook is one of the few companies that got chased and forced to simplify their banners. But anyway, so there's the GDPR, then there's the Digital Services Act. So a lot of what I was worried about actually got written into the Digital Services Act in terms of like companies being responsible for figuring out the harms that their products were causing and things like that. And also having, in Britain, we figured out that we decided that Facebook had been misusing our data because people hadn't anticipated that how they liked, kittens and puppies would tell their political views. And so they got fined the maximum fine that you could for interfering with an election like that, which was £2 million, which obviously had no impact on them at all. But the Digital Services Act puts fines in that are proportional to how much money you make. So it's like really sizable fines. So that's pretty exciting, but it's only on large platforms, whatever those are, and people are still trying to figure that out. So there's quite a lot of other things. So in my opinion, the AI Act is actually looking at a subset of all the possible AI, but it's basically saying, first of all, and it's not even in the AI Act itself, sorry, the high-level expert group wrote this white paper about, oh, I'm sorry, I get this confused, and Jim's going to correct me. But there was this white paper produced that came as part of this process between the high-level expert group and the AI Act. And like 40% of it was about the liability. If AI does something wrong, who's responsible? Well, AI doesn't do anything, okay? A company does something with AI, or an owner-operator does something with AI, right? But anyway, the Liability Act has now, a draft version has come out, and it says, basically AI is a product. It's just like ordinary product law. So basically, if something goes wrong, you, as the people who developed it, need to be able to prove that your product worked the way it was supposed to work, that you followed proper processes, you did due diligence, you tested it, and if you can't do that, then it's your problem. If you can do all that, you should be able to show that the problem is your user, or maybe a third party hacked in, but you should, if you've done due diligence, you should be able to clarify that. So that basically it makes AI into an ordinary product like any other product, which is great. Okay, so the AI Act basically says for what categories of AI do we need to have extra information to make sure we can do that. So basically nobody cares how you build like the game characters, you know, like unless they do something racist or something, I guess. But you know, basically if you have like a little thing on your phone that, you know, the little dots that run around, fine. Okay, nobody cares. If you have a chat bot that someone might mistake for a human, then you have to provide transparency information. So people should know whether they're expending effort. And I would love to know whether this applies to that thing that Google made, where their own engineer was confused about whether it was a person or not. But anyway, but normally what we're thinking about is that you know, like you get a robocall and you don't know if it's a person or a robot. Okay, but for a small fraction of AI that is in charge of things like what you heard about with the Dutch case, a small fraction of AI is used basically by government or by like banks, you know, businesses like that, to make decisions that really affect people's lives. Okay, so like who gets to go to which doctor, who goes to which school, do you get a loan, you know, how do you get categorized by when you apply for a job, you know, you know, how did Facebook decide which of the projects you wanted to do you got, you know, if that was done algorithmically, then people would have to keep information, again, so that you could tell that they'd done a good job, that there was a legitimate reason the software was written the way it was, so you would have recourse, all those kinds of things. Actually, a lot of the recourse is built back into the GDPR. But anyway, so that's basically how the AI Act does. And it's a lot longer than that makes it sound, and there's a lot of other details. But at the end of the day, that's about all it does, is say there's a certain amount of stuff you have to do if the software you have, otherwise we might have to have that kind of recourse. So I think that was the question, right?
Yeah, to give a bit, because I think both of you mentioned it, but I'm not really sure if everyone is aware of it. Okay, who has a question? I have a bunch of questions left, so no worries if you don't have any, but I would like to give you the opportunity to also ask you a question. And now I can really see that I'm no longer in the Netherlands, because in the Netherlands everyone's already speaking before before I've asked. Yes.
So let me explain. The mic is really for the live stream. It's not to...
Okay. So thanks. I have a question related to how we perpetuate bias by learning from the data. And one thing I've been puzzled about is that often we assume that the data we're learning from and the historical decisions, that these are good decisions. What I was wondering, is there a way you're familiar with that, for example, if you learn who to approve a loan for, based on historical data, but that data set contains decisions that are actually, if humans would have another look at it, would maybe say, actually these loan approvals and rejection decisions are not that great. Is there a way what would be your suggestion? Could we do something based on the historical data to improve our predictions?
Why
Sorry?
Why would we use data at
Yeah.
all for that?
Yeah.
Well, the question I had also is maybe we need to give some instructions of how our decisions, what standards we want to have for our decisions in the future, and give some good examples of what our good decisions should look like in the future.
Yeah, but I fully agree with Joanna.
Nowadays we have the feeling, and especially in the last 10 years, let's say, that data is going to give us all the answers. And that if we don't get, it's not necessarily that we assume that the data, that the decisions in the past are all good, but because there were so many decisions in the past that we will be able to reproduce it for the future. In many cases, we don't really need data to make it, to know which decision we could make. An example I give often to my students is the typical solution nowadays to identify the laws of gravity would be to collect data about 1 million or 10 million of balls coming down towers, like it was done in the long ago, and use that data and use an AI machine to reproduce the laws of gravity out of all those balls that we see coming out of, or stones coming out of towers. We don't need to do that. We know, given many conditions and contexts, what are the laws of gravity. So why do we forget the laws or the rules that were there, that were used by those people who make the decisions, because they don't make decisions, at least in most cases, by waking up in the morning and deciding, okay, this ones get credit, this they don't. So there are some rules, so why don't we combine and look at what are the rules that were used to create this data, discuss those rules with experts and probably also with users and other stakeholders, and identify, are we satisfied with these rules? Then we have both a very simple system, a very transparent system, a very explainable system. Everything is there. What we do now is kind of, we are very afraid of using any rules that are there because the data is going to reproduce the rules and we cannot really dare to take the step of it. But the data was produced with rules. So let's start there. And in this, the case that you described, I'm not saying that in all cases we can identify the rules of which were based to generate data, but most of this type of decisions were based in some kind of rules, in some kind of heuristic. So let's start from there.
So go ahead, go first. I already said something else.
About 2 points. First, as a former physicist, I want to just quickly clarify that Newton's laws of gravity are not perfect. In fact, they were expanded on by Einstein and demonstrated by experimental confirmation that Einstein's equations are correct better.
But probably the ones who were generated by data would be even worse.
Yes, but the point is that when experiment contradicts theory, then experiment wins. And second and more relevant point, data can certainly have biases. I think few people disagree with that, but heuristic quantitative rules can also have biases. I think many people are aware of a lot of examples of that in academia. My personal belief is that both purist approaches have their own issues. If you rely purely on quantitative factors, it's very easy to be swayed by gut feelings and miss what is actually going on, because human intuition is certainly not perfect. And if you rely purely on data, data does not capture a perfect window of the world. Data is trying to measure quantities, and those measurements can be incomplete, and they will not capture everything. It's a common mistake to assume that data covers everything that you need to know, when in fact there are a lot of things that cannot be captured by numerical quantitative effects, and it is often a temptation to ignore the ones that cannot be measured and focus on the ones that can be. which is really just present-day updating of an old joke that I'm sure that many people have heard before. The police see that someone is walking late at night and looking frantically near a street light. He's like, "What's going on?" "Oh, I lost my watch in the light." Why did you lose it over here?" "No, I lost it over there in the dark." "Then why are you searching over here?" "Well, the light is much better here."
So yeah, so I agree. If you can design something first, then that's better. It's simpler. But going back to so I mentioned the paper we put out in 2017, where we looked at the entire English language internet, and used that to reproduce the biases that American populations have, interestingly. But Americans disproportionately influence the English language internet. But anyway, there was another group that had almost the same idea and had a paper come out at almost the same time. But they did something really different. It was like Microsoft and Boston University. And they decided that they only looked at sexism. We looked at all kinds of isms, but they only looked at sexism. But then they tried to figure out what was the correct amount of sexism. They crowdsourced that. And then they tried to warp the machine learning that they'd done to bend it so it would reflect what the crowd thought would be the right answer. I think that is like a very bad idea. I think it's, but it's extremely popular. And I've been wondering for a long while why people thought, so what we suggested in our paper was that there was two possible solutions to this problem. One was that you just add another layer that takes out the stuff okay, so actually the whole point of learning is to get bias. You're trying to find out things like the stuff false, right?
Yeah.
Bias just means regularities,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But some regularities are ones we don't want to exist anymore, like that women don't get to be programmers or something, right? And so then we try to address that. So the point is that's like when you have text prediction. You could text predict every single word that somebody typically writes, but most phones will have a block that will not predict a short list of swear words, right? So you just have a second thing that there's like, mostly we're going to learn the new words you're using, but not those words, right? And that's a pretty easy way to do it architecturally. But the other option is, of course, to learn from a subset of reality. So sometimes people go out and try to deliberately, train off of their favorite, national public broadcaster instead of the tabloids or something, and use that for their training. And that's actually one of the things the Obama administration talked a lot about, was that we don't want AI to sort of codify the policy based on the past. So people living in certain neighborhoods were more likely to commit crimes. So then they're expected to commit crimes, and they're spotted earlier committing crimes, and they get police records, and they, it's this whole
Confirmation bias.
yeah. So the point is, a lot of these things were happening anyway, and so this goes back to my very first paper that I mentioned, just an artifact, right? This is how we are doing these things. We are expecting things to be the way they were before, and I think one of the reasons people freak out about AI is actually because when you write down either what you were supposed to be doing but nobody actually was, or this new plan, now people can fight about it, because before we're sort of increasing transparency in what the humans were doing before, and people don't like that. So one example that came up with that was Stuttgart. I shouldn't name the town, but I already did. Oh well. It turned out that some of the schools there had rules about who got into the school. You're all trying to get your kids into the best school or whatever. It was something like kids had to bake a cake. Okay? Well, again, if you're dealing with people from a lot of different ethnicities or whatever, cake baking isn't a part of everybody's life, right? And so it was clearly something that was biased towards a certain subpart of the population that was going to bake good cakes. Or good by some criteria that was being judged by these schools, right? So that was the kind of thing that once the algorithms came down, and it was huge in New York City, once there was algorithms that you could write down and say, how are the kids getting allocated, then the parents can actually fight in a way they couldn't fight when they didn't really know what was going on and who was arbitrarily wielding power. So in a way, it's just us having to deal with the truth. I think we really are in an information age, and as much as there are people trying to misinform us, I think a lot of the conflict that is actually about the information and really having to deal with reality.
And actually, if I may just continue on what Sophie was saying, there is not a model which generates data that creates a model, but it's really a feedback loop. So model creates data, which then is used to generate a model, which makes data again. So wherever you start in this loop, you have advantage and disadvantage, but assuming that there is a starting point which is kind of given and fixed, and that's where we have to start, either by the rules or the models or by the data, it's ignoring that there is this feedback loop which needs to be acknowledged.
Thank you. Anyone else who has a question?
Thanks for the talk. I was really interested in what you were saying about the homogenization that occurs through increased communication, because one of the criticisms that I've got for like the little bit of philosophy of technology work I've done is that I'm trying to criticize the homogeneity that's occurring through the increased use of social media and all that, but I'm met with the objection that, look, when you're on something like YouTube or Twitter, you have an infinite amount of content that you can be consuming from. So this idea of like increased homogenization, like you can't really prove it. It's only there in really vague forms, like co-grouping of viewers. If you watch this video, someone else might have watched a similar video, but it becomes very hard to prove homogenization, which is evidently occurring in polarization. But yeah.
Okay, so that's a really cool and interesting question, and I could go so many ways with it. I actually talked about the fact that because if you have better communication, you can find a coordinated answer. That doesn't require homogenization. That if you decide to construct a public good together, in fact, the diversity can actually be quite useful for constructing public goods. So I wasn't really talking about homogenization there. I personally, and this is again not evidence thing, but I do sometimes think that one of the things that we do when we use algorithmic recommenders, and personally I hate those. I like the sequential ones like on Twitter, you know. But if you use, it used to be that before Twitter had algorithmic feeds like a Facebook-like feed, that you could tell who somebody was by just seeing like 15 of their links, the most recent 15 links, because everyone followed slightly different people. And so just seeing what things they clicked on Twitter already gave you information that they were following this set of people. So we are all individual in some sense. And at the same sense, I do think that in a polarized context, a subset of population that is afraid, as I mentioned before, that knows that the system is not working for them, they tend to be somewhere where the economy is bad, and inequality turns out just to be one way of indicating that. That then they want to find a way to create a new subset of society that's going to fight, because often this stuff happens when there's not enough resources. That's why we see it in things like when the climate's going bad or something, right? So I think that's when you get extremism, extreme beliefs, because those are costly, right? The rest of society rejects you. You're saying things that everyone's agreed is offensive. And so the group of people that are now waving this offensive flag have created a group that is expensive to be a member of, and they're all sort of basically swearing that they're all going to behave in the way that whoever they've chosen as a leader has declared. So I think the homogenization is a process that people that are afraid go through to try to conform. But I thought the direction you might be going to go is I'm like, oh, but I thought everybody was in these little tiny silos and feedback and whatever, and there's a fragmentation of society. And I do think that the model that I originally suggested to those people was a little broken, because the whole thing is that we can so quickly now collaborate and create new identities and new public goods. I think that's actually what's happened. And so it hasn't turned into like some big lasting, new organism. Although in a way we need to hope that we can do something like that if we're going to solve things like climate change.
And I was reminded of, I don't know the name, but in social psychology there is a well-known phenomenon that if if you are in an environment in which you are the, let's say, the outgroup, so you are the different one, you will try to find other ones which are similar to you. But if you are in an environment in which you all are similar to you, then you will like to stress your difference. So we
Differentiate
yeah,
within.
we differentiate within the in-group, and we associate in the out-group. So this is a phenomenon that happens very often, and I don't know the name, there is, but also the fact that the more you are pointed out as being the different one, or the out-group one, the more creates the feeling that then you have to get together with other ones which are also being pointed as being out ones. So this is kind of it has nothing to do with AI or with social media, but it's a very basic social psychology type of phenomenon.
Yeah. But a lot of AI has to do with humans.
Exactly.
So is it something to follow up, because you wanted to say something?
Yes, I just wanted to add briefly. I thought it was interesting that you were arguing that society is becoming more homogenized from social media, just because I have also heard arguments that society is becoming more heterogenized from social media, that specifically previously people in outgroups faced public pressure to fit in essentially, and now they can find other members of that outgroup, whether that consists of extreme views or views outside of the political norm, or sexual minorities, the queer community, etc., or many other examples. And so it's interesting that many people think that social media is problematic, but disagree on exactly why that is the case, which is perhaps the story of what's going on with social media regulation.
No.
Yeah, maybe we
Yeah.
need to
Ask her question.
Yeah, let's.
Sorry, because I want to give more people a chance to ask a question. Go ahead.
There is going to be reception afterwards, so you can keep intervening.
Okay, many thanks for the very interesting, amazing meeting. I have a more philosophical question, because you study philosophy. How do you see the impact of this fast development of artificial intelligence on the human condition? In fact, we see that the replacement of the human being, that the labor market, more injustice worldwide, and the anthropomorphic vision sometimes of the artificial intelligence is due to the fact that we are replaced by the machine. And for example, I have 3 examples. If we were child, we studied chess. We went to chess, and it was very nice. It was a challenge. But now if I say to my children, okay, you have to play, I say, why, if the machine will win me? And the second example is about poem. We know the machine can write poems, abstract poems. Well, it is true, but in fact, if the people read these poems, they cannot distinguish very well which poem was made by person or by the machine, or the paintings. And I mean, it's again, what's about the human impact of the human condition, because the sense of life, of learning, of education, was to make something that now is made easily by a machine, perhaps with any meaning, but in fact, it replaced me of this is my feeling. And the question of the justice, of course. Thank you.
And I do think this is one of the most important things we need now is more humanities. This is actually nice sequencing. Because as we have more transparency and we understand more the extent to which, I mean, a lot of people aren't even on board with the fact we're animals yet. Yeah, so we have to get over the Darwinian thing. But now we're going to find out that we're algorithmic animals, and that we could probably use AI to predict our own best move better than we could predict our own best moves ourselves. However, I don't think it's insurmountable. So first of all, it's not about machines taking all the jobs. That's like a misunderstanding of labor. People want want to perform product. They want to have people that they're in charge of. They want to have people that will pay them to do things.
In Africa.
All over people do
All over,
things.
yeah.
People love having kind of these social relationships, and so it's not. So there's actually now more people that are working as bank tellers than there were before automated teller machines, because that actually lowered the cost of bank branches, and so they opened more branches. It's not that there was some finite amount of bank tellers. It was that there was a trade-off between it. However, having said all that, I do agree that people are going, well, I'm surprised that you said your children won't play chess just because the computer beats them, because I'm sure they play lots of other computer games that the computers beat them.
Yes, a lot of children started to school.
Yeah.
That's the problem. I have the feeling sometimes that the people dedicated to artificial intelligence have a paradigm of a person. And you see some child in mind, and I have other imago of the children. And I have the idea that in 20 years it is expected, because of the ethical problem worldwide, that more than 1,000 million African people will not have any job. It's not because of the artificial intelligence itself. It doesn't matter. It's about our human responsibility.
I don't think you should believe all these, it's not just about Africa. But it's not, it isn't, so it's happening everywhere. So when you hear something that's like this happening to Africa, be suspicious, okay? Because we're a lot of us in the same context. A lot of the jobs that we used to have, like the massive amount of agriculture jobs we used to have, now are done by like a single tractor or whatever.
Yeah.
But we just keep inventing new jobs. So that's not the big problem. There is a problem though that the jobs we used to have, we get paid less and less for because more and more people could do them. So we use automation to simplify. And for some people, that's great. So like there's actually some really interesting books about how automation increased the capacity of people with disabilities to make a living. So in some way, for some people it's great, but for people, some taxi drivers are really annoyed that their job has gotten so much more boring to follow around a GPS thing. So I think that's about. And again, I think this is a lot about government policy. Are we going to look for ways to enhance people and to use to help them use their brains? Or are we going to look for ways to, like for example, apparently in China, they're looking very much how to make people more exchangeable for each other. But again, this is nothing in particular to do with technology. We have done this over and over. Humanity dehumanizes and mass kills, unfortunately. Like 120 times in the 20th century, there was a mass killing of populations that weren't considered worthwhile. So I think finding the value of our lives is philosophy. It is humanities, and it is a choice that the EU pushes really hard on, this fundamental rights thing, because of what it suffered before. But I don't think it's if you go to a pub and they're doing a pub quiz, they don't Google the answers. And you know that there's more professional chess players now than there was before chess was the best chess beat people. So a lot of us, only one person used to be the world's best chess player. Now now nobody is the world's best chess player. But so what? For the majority of people that do or don't enjoy playing chess, and it's never been that everybody enjoys playing it, but they can make up a reason why not. But
there's an impact of the human condition.
But I think the issue is we tend to equate being human with intelligence, because intelligence is maybe what separates us from animals, or in some accounts is what. And being human is much more than intelligence. And the intelligent tasks that are being replaced by machines are still very limited in the scope of all the possible intelligence tasks. Are very cognitive intelligence tasks, very mathematical intelligence tasks, all things which have to do with emotional intelligence, social intelligence, and so on. The machines are very, very far from being able to do. And also, even in those tasks in which machines are better than us, And we probably all agree that a calculator, which none of us would associate with artificial intelligence, is much better than me or than any of you in calculating the square root of 3 or the square root of 223. And still doesn't mean that we don't need mathematicians or accountants or so on. The fact that we need to understand when we need to calculate the square root of 3, what does it mean and how we are going to use that, are all types of tasks which are still and will be, even as machines are replacing us in many of the more calculating or cognitive tasks, the overall concept is still something which we need to do as people, and that machines cannot really replace us.
I gotta say something. I know it's not my turn now. But I gotta say something with this calculator thing. When I was a kid, calculators were still relatively new, and in physics class, we would do like 10 problems on the exam, and we would complain that there was only 10 problems. If you couldn't get one, you were already not automatically at 90%, which in America is bad. In Britain, that's great. But the point is that our teacher was old enough that he wasn't very old, but he said, look, 10, 15 years ago, there weren't calculators, and people had to come in with their slide rules and their logarithm tables, and there were only 3 questions. Yeah. So the fact that we now had calculators allowed us to better differentiate ourselves, so we got a chance on 10 questions instead of only 3 questions.
Yeah,
Okay,
indeed.
someone else. There's 2 questions. Okay, sorry, I was looking. Sorry. Yeah, the bias is the chair.
Decisions without the use of data.
Hi, thank you very much. This was a really great discussion. My question is, in a sense, related to political polarization and what you mentioned regarding the communities which are less, I guess, conducive to believing in the idea of communality and being willing to accept these ideals. And this is most likely people who are, in a sense, very vulnerable, who are economically challenged, who are yeah, exactly, and it's a form of failure, and I do think it's a kind of vulnerability. And I also think that, especially with polarization, these people are also the individuals most likely to be preyed upon through, like you said, extremism, radicalization. And I think technology, algorithms, AI, they have a role to play that can foster this development in negative directions, and I think we're all aware of them. But I'm curious, as experts in this field, what are the ways in which technology and AI can use this vulnerability and, rather than push it in the direction to lead to all these horrible things, push it in a more positive direction? Are there ways in which it can channel emotions that aren't fear in order to, at this incredibly vulnerable point for so many millions of people, not make it worse, but I guess foster these values that are the most in need, especially then?
To mind, and it has very little to do with AI, but with digitalization, is a couple of years ago when cell phones became much more available than before, also in other countries, like in Africa or in South America, there was a big positive use because for instance, the farmers, the small farmers which were growing coffee or cacao in a very small place, they were until that moment dependent on some middle person who would come there and tell them a big story about, yeah, this year it's the prices are very bad and no one is buying coffee and whatever, so we only give you 10 cents for your coffee and be happy that you get 10 cents because, and they were extremely dependent on who would come to buy their coffee and what kind of price those one give. With a cell phone, they could directly themselves contact the stock markets, wherever in the world they want, know the actual prices, and have a much better position on their negotiation with this middle person who would come and buy the coffee. So there are, and this is just one which I remember as you were talking, but there are many cases in which, with a bit of push, technology can exactly be applied and used to support those populations who are the most vulnerable or most marginalized, exactly because governments have been failed them and all kinds of other ones jump in the gap that the governments give and misuse people, and technology can exactly help them to breach that type of thing.
Okay, thank
Let's
you.
start the
We
clock.
have 5 minutes left, and we also started a bit later. And we have 2 questions left, if I've understood it.
Let's first take the one online.
Oh, there's also. Oh, sorry, I didn't know that. There's also a chat box online. Okay, can you read it out loud?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, let's get all the questions. Okay, can you read out?
Yeah. There's research done that really shows that people consider robots more like another species than just tools or things. If there's that tendency in people, if people will bond with robots, especially social robots, then considering robots as simple products is simply not enough. The impact of robots on social life is much bigger. For example, social robots that are aggressive or never make mistakes will change the social behavior of people around them. And then in between brackets, the question is mainly about the AI Act by the EU.
Okay, then we have one more in the back.
Yeah, my question is about some of these generalizations that I hear of, computers cannot do this and humans cannot do that, like computers cannot write poetry. Well, most humans cannot write decent poetry either, and some computers can be trained to write actually quite, professionally valid poetry that would pass, for real in a professional competition amongst poets. And you could elaborate examples. So I think it is a little bit, let's say, unfair to sort of generalize, because some humans are really incredibly good at some specialized tasks, as are some computers. And then it's unfair to say, yeah, but this computer that can do poetry, cannot do the dishes because it doesn't even know what dishes are, or a dishwasher. I mean, so, I think we have to compare like with like and not generalize.
And here's the final question. Oh, you don't? Okay.
Can I ask one?
Yeah,
Specifically
you're the organizer, I think.
Specifically for Sophie. Sophie, did Facebook retaliate after you blew the whistle?
So specifically, my blowing the whistle was a multi-part story, so this is a bit complicated. So within Facebook, there's a tradition that when you leave the company, you post a picture of your badge and write something within the company. There's a platform called Workplace, which is basically Facebook for employees, or etc. And so you can write things that could go viral and be seen theoretically by every employee. And so most of them are fairly, I don't know how to say, nice. They're like, it was a pleasure to work with all of you. I'm off to my next great adventure. See you all, how people get on LinkedIn and that sort of thing. But sometimes they were also more interesting. Some people wrote controversial ones explaining the reasons they left. Some people wrote things saying, I think these are the problems at Facebook. Occasionally, they will be taken down for being too spicy, because content moderation also occurs among Facebook employees. And so there was the employees leaving the company decided, when they leave the company, before they write their badge post, they're also going to make a copy on their website, password protect it, and put the password and the link in the original post, so that Facebook could take down the post, but then people will share the link and the password, and then they will still be able to read the badge post. And so, anyways, when I was writing my own badge post, which I did not expect to become international news, and I had borrowed this technique from this person, and so I wrote my badge when I wrote my badge post. I did a number of things I wasn't supposed to. For instance, they ordered me not to tell anyone I was being fired, which I wasn't sure how they were going to enforce. Like, were they going to fire me again for saying? and that was very silly, but I was pretty honest about the work I had been doing. The work I had been doing to protect elections worldwide, that Facebook had been reluctant to stop, some of which it had refused to act on, and the fact that no one would be taking care of it now that I was departing. And which was, I mean, Facebook hires a lot of young, impressionable 20-something-year-olds on the promise that they're trying to make the world a better place. If you tell a lot of young, impressionable 20-something-year-olds that, some of them will actually believe it. And so this made a lot of people very upset. And so when I was being fired, they took down my post pretty quickly. Then they called me and asked that I remove it from my website. I told them I would do so if they restored my post internally to the company. The next day, I was told that my website had taken down my hosting server because it was hosting, I believe, illegal content that belonged to Facebook, the company, or something. A few days later, my domain also went down. It was still the best $5 a month I ever spent. And so that was what retaliation happened, and you could call it retaliation. They have not done any retaliation in the sense of legal lawsuits, or they have occasionally badmouthed me to the press, but I think that's fairly expected. I mean, they could certainly sue me for every penny I had. I mean, I was worried about more serious retaliation, about finding legal reasons to prosecute me. Before I came forward, I discussed privately with my girlfriend what would happen if she were compelled by the law to testify against me, which is a conversation that I hope most of you never have to have with your partners. But Facebook is not very popular in legal or governmental society these days, and so I've not faced legal action. I hope that makes sense. No, I finished.
Of course, because we have 2 more questions to answer, so please give short answers.
Sorry.
On the issue of the species, comparing species with species and computers' writing policy or not, I agree that we have to compare species with species, but especially the human species. Computers don't generate poetry. People have developed very smart algorithms which can be used by other people to generate poetry, but we cannot forget that all that is human work. So we do need to compare species with species in the fact that the machine itself doesn't generate poetry by itself, but based on the algorithms or the models that someone made and someone else used.
Okay, and then the question online.
Okay, well, I actually want to do to both of the last two very quickly. I totally agree with you. I hate it when people say, "Oh, computers can't do X" or whatever. We are seeing, and you're absolutely right. A lot of people are like, "When is AI going to pass the human levels of understanding?" And like, I don't know, 10 years ago, either the OECD or the EU, I can't remember which, ran a study that was the other way around. They said, what proportion of EU citizens can read as well as AI? And it was only like 30%, right? So to comprehend as well as AI, to make a summary paragraph or something out of a book or something. So I absolutely, when we're talking about, and I was trying to say that when I was responding to you before, that I can get better music out of playing a Beatles album, but I would still rather play guitar myself, and I would still rather go see live music. A lot of people wouldn't. There's a lot less live music now than there was a century ago, right? But there are still some of us who really enjoy it, and I think we will keep finding new ways that we're going to enjoy ourselves, because that's what we do. And this comes back to what Virginia just said. We are the ones writing the software, writing the poetry, and some people will love sitting at home and pushing a button over and over and getting a new picture every time. But other people will prefer to have a painting that their kid made, or that their lover made, or that's just some human they admired made, right? There's going to be both sets, and when we make those decisions that we want to have, hand-knit clothes, I have a hand-knitted Icelandic sweater on right now, then we will keep humans employed. That's sort of a cultural decision. And so coming back to the robots, I just find this whole, I know people feel really strongly about it. We want so badly to create, our infinitely better progeny. But it's like saying, I don't believe that tobacco kills me because I like smoking. It's like, and it isn't going to kill you immediately. But believing that you have an equal, why do you want to own an equal? Why do you want to have an equal you can turn off and on, and it's designed from scratch? It is nothing like having a child. You don't get to choose the parameters of children, right? I mean, a little bit. You don't get to choose like how many limbs they have, whether they
You
have
get to try.
lasers. Yeah, no, but you don't get to choose like with the LiDAR. Do you use LiDAR or do you use wheels? No, right? Any child any human, if you isolate them, it's a form of torture, right? And we don't have to build AI that way. So yes, people identify with it, but what I would recommend is that we educate them and we help, and we don't have things in our home that makes our kids feel unhappy.
Have all the questions been answered? Okay, great. Thank you so much for these 2 very inspiring hours. So I want to thank Sophie Zhang, Virginia Dignum, and Joanna Bryson. And maybe Maurice can say more about the drinks. They're apparently also organized.
So the drinks are indeed over there in the tuinkamer, the garden room. So you exit over there, take a right, take another right, and then enter the door over there. And there's gonna be something to eat and something to drink, I think. Yeah, and thanks again for coming, and thank you.